Hello, welcome to another episode of Context. I'm Dilek Tuna. Tensions between Iran and Israel have once again surged, raising concerns across the region about the risk of wider escalation. While the immediate focus is on direct confrontation, regional actors are increasingly involved diplomatically, strategically, and in some cases, quietly preparing for spillover. Turkey has voiced concern, Arab Gulf states are watching developments closely, and Azerbaijan, with its unique ties to both Iran and Israel, is emerging in some discussions as a possible diplomatic bridge. Today on Context, we explore the wider implications of the crisis, the risks of further instability, and whether there's still space for regional mediation. To unpack, I have two guests joining me with sharp insights. Ali Bakr, a foreign policy and security analyst, joins us from Qatar University, and Klaus Jürgens, a political analyst at Economy First London, joining us from Aydın, Turkey. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both. Klaus, what are the risks of miscalculation, especially with multiple players acting semi-independently in the region?
Well, thanks for having me. Now, I think it is almost a crazy world again. Now, I prepared a bit, and if you allow me, I quickly want to cite CIPRI in Stockholm, just to remind us all. We have now 9 nuclear-armed states. United States, Russia, UK, France, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. And according to CIPRI, there are 12,241 estimated warheads. Now, they were decreasing over time because geopolitically things were somehow moving along, but this is now unfortunately in the past. And my greatest worry is that the production of these warheads will actually increase one more time, which would be the exact opposite of what the entire free world needs. Now, if I may come back to the point, not only Turkey, but your fine nation as well. Yes, as it was mentioned by yourself, you have contacts to both Iran and Israel, and you could perhaps become a perfect bridge builder. But with all my due modesty, building bridges, of course, always depends on if there is a bridge at the other end. And if there are ends at the other end, proverbially speaking, Azerbaijan can really become a leading player in this regard, hopefully de-escalating the situation, perhaps even holding a conference in Baku or somewhere else, or Shusha springs to mind, or wherever in your fine nation. I think Azerbaijan is well positioned. Last point, if I may, a little comparison to the Republic of Turkey. It is now some years ago when Sayın Ibrahim Kalin, in a different position, coined the term 360 degrees foreign policy for Turkey. I can very well imagine Azerbaijan being at the crossroads and a very, very close, not only friend, but you know it, how many nations, how many people, and united, that Azerbaijan can actually do exactly the same, the 360 degrees foreign policy for the benefit of the region, not only the Southern Caucasus, the entire region, maybe the entire world.
Okay. And Klaus, how are Gulf states, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, reacting, especially those who have normalized ties with Israel?
Well, eventually, I think there will be a certain realization kicking in that regardless of, I was born in Germany, I am German, you know, we have our guilt complex. You know, our politics is the country's Staatsräson, that you can never criticize Israel, no matter what it does. I can imagine that eventually this will changing as well, because the last thing any German wants is a third world war. And of course, Gaza is in my heart every day. The innocent people, children, women, families are being killed by Israel, the aggressor. But at the same time, the Germans and the free world and other countries must wake up and say, this time, Mr. Netanyahu and Israel really went one step too far. You can't just invade one country after the other and then create your own little global empire. This is really, some said today on German media, what is Mr. Netanyahu's calcul? What does he really hope for to achieve with this? I don't think so that he will achieve anything but condemnation. And we may come back to this in a later question, perhaps. Is he actually still in the country, or was this all fake news and disinformation?
Okay. All right. Now we've got Ali back on the line. My next question is for you, Ali, here. Azerbaijan's government has called for restraint and dialogue amid the Iran-Israel tensions. How is this being received regionally, particularly given Baku's close ties with Israel?
I think positively, because everyone in the region right now is concerned about the possible spillover effects if one of the two players, especially Iran, decides to escalate and maybe hit targets in the Gulf, whether oil facilities or maybe U.S. military bases. And that's why we have witnessing several shuttle diplomacy from Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and of course, like you said, Azerbaijan and Turkey, to try to contain the issue and shift the matter back to the diplomatic channels where negotiations have been going on between Iran and the US. I don't think this is an easy task to be achieved, but also I think that the Iranian government doesn't have a lot of options if they choose to escalate. Unrationally, this might end up the current regime in Iran and maybe end up by destroying Iran itself, and this is not a rational option. And or the government has to de-escalate and then go for the negotiations again. But in this scenario, I think that most of the keys are in the U.S. Because the Trump administration has to offer something also to save face of the Iranian regime. They have to take this into calculations in any potential negotiations in the coming few days. They should not close the door on this option. Otherwise, we will be going to further escalation, which will not be good for any country in the region.
No. Okay, and Klaus, what do you think is Iran's end game here? Is the escalation with Israel more rhetoric or real risk of a broader war?
I think it may sound surprising when international or German commentators says this, but eventually even Iran will have to abide by realpolitik. And Iran wants to achieve that there are no more sanctions, that its people can actually flourish, trade, exchange, and travel, and what have you. And I'm only mentioning spare parts for planes or helicopters and this tragic accident some time ago. So I think if Israel would not have done the first step, Iran would not have done the first step, to be honest. I think it would not make any sense to escalate the war before Tehran really has counted who are our friends and who are our enemies. And this is a very complicated calculation, a very complicated math, because any other nation in the region only wants to protect its own borders and its own people. And if they would perceive that Israel-Iran aggression could pose a risk to them as well, I am not sure that there will be unwavering support for Tehran. So it's a give and take, as my esteemed colleague just mentioned. Yes, de-escalation is the key. Who can achieve it? Why not Donald Trump? If Donald Trump steps in and says, you guys have to negotiate now, and if not, but what can we say? I don't talk with you anymore. Of course not. He must talk with all of them. Mm-hmm. And same perhaps like with Ukraine. Why not suggest that Azerbaijan actually can become, as I've mentioned, a mediator, holding a kind of de-escalation conference between the two nations and international observers on Azerbaijani soil? Why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I want to hone in on US's role here. Ali, what role does the US play in managing or inflaming this tension?
To be honest, I think that Netanyahu wouldn't have done this if he has no green light from the US. And how did we reach to this situation? It is from the US perspective that they have been negotiating with the Iranian government, and Trump presented an offer for Iran, and the Iranians they didn't respond, and there were, if we remember very well, just 2 days before the Israeli assault on Iran, there were still negotiations whether the next round of talks between U.S. and Iran will be held on Oman or not. So it was not determined, and this is when Trump thought that probably the Iranian government is manipulating him and maneuvering, and then a strong message should be sent to the Iranian government that so that they can take these negotiations seriously. And this is when Netanyahu launched strikes against Iran. What Netanyahu is hoping to achieve, I think, not much. They only want to disrupt the nuclear program and also destabilize and weaken the Iranian regime, leaving the supreme leader isolated, hoping that from the U.S. perspective this time, this would put pressure on Iran to agree on the proposal that Trump has offered them just a few days ago. I think things will not go easy given the current developments, and Americans should step in strongly to give a realistic offer also for the Iranians in order to leave them a space to take a step back, and at the same time pressure on Israel and give a strong signal that Netanyahu cannot continue in the same policies that he has been taking in the last few years. I mean, this is madness, and after all, this is the Middle East. You cannot control the outcome of any war that you can start. So there's always a possibility of spillover and escalation. No one can control it if we reach to this stage, and this is where the U.S. should definitely tell the Israelis it is not acceptable anymore for Netanyahu to be in government, actually, or to have such government in such situation.
Okay. And Klaus, Iran and Israel aren't just enemies here. They're embedded in a web of alliances. So who else gets pulled in here?
Well, many countries will get pulled in here. I follow it closely, of course, in the United Kingdom. And believe me, in Germany, the newspapers and media commentaries are full of that we have to come to Israel's rescue no matter what. And now they are attacking Iran, and some German commentators actually say, and some politicians, look, how can anyone defend Iran against this? It all boils down, according to me, to a humanitarian question. Can someone simply just invade another country without being invaded, even if they think it might pose a risk? And can they just risk innocent lives by doing so without putting into the mathematics, as I said before, that perhaps, God forbid, one day the same might happen to your own population? And this is really, I think Netanyahu has absolutely lost the plot, same like my dear colleague just said. And the Americans must now come to terms with it. They want no longer to be the policemen of the world. They have domestic problems, from the economy to financing small and medium-sized enterprises, make America great again, what have you, and tariffs. They can't afford being involved in the Third World War next door or across oceans. So they have leverage over Israel. If any other country just tell them, please stop bombing Iran, go down to the negotiating table, and then we might actually help you that you're not at risk, but stop invading other countries. Yes, I think I have to admit, I would love if the European Union would be much, much, much stronger, more powerful in a positive sense, not negative, and tell friends and allies when it is too enough. You outreached our sympathy this time. Please listen to us. No word from Brussels, not at all, just a little bit of, yeah, here and there, and we still have to focus on Gaza. And so, unfortunately, Malisev, as we would say here, yes, Washington should step in and literally tell their allies in Israel, I'm sorry, this is one step too far.
Okay. Ali, what are Turkey's calculations here, balancing NATO, Israel ties, and its strategic relations with Iran?
Well, Turkey is in a very critical situation. Wars have been increasingly stabilizing element in its surrounding and neighborhood for the last 20 years at least. So definitely Turkey doesn't want another escalation in the region, not between Iran and Israel, definitely at this time. So the Turkish official position has been to condemn the Israeli assault against Iran, try to open the door for diplomacy, back any U.S. efforts to go back to the negotiations table between Iran and the U.S. administration, and try to facilitate also this way. At the same time, Turkey has been decisive in terms of condemning Netanyahu in particular and his regional policies. There's past between Netanyahu, negative past between Netanyahu and President Erdogan, and Israel has been also trying during the last few months to undermine Turkey and Turkey's role in Syria. So this is a very critical situation for Turkey. Doesn't want to see it escalating in any way, and there's also calculation related to its nuclear situation. Turkey also is aiming to construct nuclear reactors with the help of Russia. It already has a small scientific nuclear reactor. It wants to preserve its right to enrich its soil. So the nuclear file is also a matter of concern and interest at the same time for the Turkish authorities, and they have interest to follow closely how this escalation will end up in terms of the nuclear negotiations. All in all, Turkey is working hard, along with other countries such as Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, to de-escalate the situation and go back to the negotiation table between Iran and the US.
Okay. And Klaus, let's discuss Turkey with you a little further as well. How does Turkey handle this delicate situation with strong Israel ties, but also ambitions as a regional mediator and Muslim leader?
Absolutely, Dilek. I think coming back to my 360 points foreign policy, a comment I made before, coined by Sain Kalin years ago. Now, I think Turkey managed exactly that. You look north, east, south, west. You might at one point look closer to the west, one day closer to the south, it doesn't matter, global south, global north, east and west. But ultimately you realize that I would put it like this: you can be sympathetic to everyone. You can help to build these bridges as long as there's an end at the other side. You can always mediate. You can always help to de-escalate. But there comes a time, I would call it the political coming of age, where you have to speak up when justice is not carried out, when innocent people are being killed, not by one, by two, but by the tens of thousands, and perhaps spilling over into another country or the entire region. And then eventually you have to come to a point to say enough is enough. And still, mediating is what Turkey does absolutely well. And now reaching out and saying we want to de-escalate, but as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said, don't forget about how he would, if I'm not mistaken, phrase it, the genocidal situation on the hands of Israel in Palestine. Don't forget about now, because there is another conflict coming, Iran-Israel, and God forbid, a third one coming. We still have to focus on Palestine. I said this decades ago when I was very young and even student politics. Without peace in Palestine, there will be never any peace in the region. And unfortunately, and not about me, but my entire generation, we were proven unfortunately right. So Turkey is absolutely correct to say, don't forget about Palestine. This conflict has to be sorted first, and then we approach the other issues. But yes, 360 degrees foreign policy, closely cooperating with Azerbaijan. And you mentioned the Gulf states. They will look very, very positively towards Turkey. Close relations, yes. But at the same time, when something goes wrong, sometimes you really have to use the verbal hammer and say, no, as I've said, enough is enough. But Turkey can lead the way indeed, but hopefully hand in hand with Baku.
Okay. And Ali, could Ankara and Baku coordinate a regional diplomatic effort, or are they too close to one side?
No, I don't think so. I think despite the tension between Turkey and Israel, intelligence ties are there, and they establish a good channel to communicate, especially in such cases. I think that Turkey also has its regional weight and has its also precedence when it comes to a positive contribution in the escalating regional crisis. We saw this in many regions. Turkey also is a very powerful country in terms of military, which means it would be taken seriously when it says something. And Turkey's relation with the US right now is very good, which means this would also facilitate its role if the two parties agree on adopting a Turkish channel. Of course, Azerbaijan also is a very constructive, has a very constructive foreign policy and has ties with both countries, and also has an interest, genuine interest, not to see this crisis escalating, because the spillovers will definitely reach everywhere in the region. So yes, I believe, but I should say that this kind of escalation also between Israel and Iran needs international players to be involved, so that the Israelis can realize there is seriousness in this issue, and we need also pressure to be put on Israel. Yes, indeed, the Iranians have been a stabilizing factor in the region for the last at least 2-3 decades. They also invaded other countries and killed thousands of people, especially in Syria. But this doesn't mean that international community should allow Netanyahu to do what he has been doing in the last also a few years, and enough should be enough to be told. I think that such a situation needs a collective effort from Azerbaijan, from Turkey, from the Gulf countries, including also US and Europe. All countries should come to terms and should agree that no such escalation should be allowed from now on. Diplomacy should be the solution, and also Netanyahu cannot stay in power.
Okay. Ali, Klaus, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for hosting us.
Now, as tensions persist between Iran and Israel, the risk of a broader regional impact cannot be ignored. For countries like Turkey, the Arab Gulf states and others with strong security and economic interests, the situation is being watched with increasing concern. Amid the uncertainty, there are also quiet conversations about diplomacy and questions around whether countries like Azerbaijan, with its ties to both sides, could play a constructive role. That's all for this edition of Context. Thanks for watching.